Few games I've played reach the heights and intensity that are achieved within the first 5 minutes of picking up Underrail, and that's because it's one of the most hardcore games out there. For those of you who haven't played, it's essentially a love letter to the original isometric Fallout games of old, but somehow is even more difficult and overbearing. In the title, you get to select from a variety of builds and upgrades that you will have to painstakingly find throughout the game, all deep underground, surrounded by serial killers, sadistic warlords, and retro-futuristic sci-fi themes. A cataclysm of sorts has occurred far above you on the surface of this mysterious world, and has thrust humanity into deep caverns in the crust of the planet, in order to survive the inhospitable wasteland above. But down below, things don't fare much better. Because of the conditions and fall of humanity, everything is archaic and horrifying. Bartering for goods is a life or death affair, almost everywhere you go is covered in darkness, and if you step even 1 foot outside the confines of any major town, you will be swarmed by giant and irradiated fauna. This means every single moment you are playing the game is a calculated and nerve-wracking affair, deciding when to use precious weapons you have like grenades and when to cut your losses and run for your life. Each and every quest, enemy, or new zone requires your full attention and thinking outside the box in order to conquer. And because you cannot respec or take back any of the decisions you've made, it's exceptionally easy to quickly find yourself in a position where you're literally screwed and have to start the game over from the very beginning in order to progress. It's about as hardcore as games can get, probably a big reason this title never blew up like many other CRPGs that are now loved. But the reason it does have such a fanatic cult following is that once you learn how to play by the game's rules and succumb to the pain, you're retreated to one of the most fascinating dying worlds of all time. First and foremost, unlike many other games with forgotten and ruined worlds, the actual places where catastrophe first occurred in Underrail you never even get to see. Since you are now stuck underground years past whatever thrust humanity into the deep, you only get to use your imagination to assume what things must be like above. And considering what you are left with down below is so gruesome and fearsome, it's hard to see how anyone would have wanted to leave the surface. Poring over lore tombs in the underground point to hints like massive warfare, environmental collapse, and resource depletion, but others give hints of alien or interdimensional interference. And the underground itself is no slouch either, as behind every dark alley or desolate cave are not just monsters, but hints to the past of this world. For example, how did the animals and plant life deep underground grow so large or spawn strange mutations? Was genetic engineering going on at some point? Or what about the handful of shadowy organizations that have popped up in the chaos of the underground railways, and the oceans that stretch for miles beneath the sharpened stalactites above? It's a setting that is practically begging to be explored, and with each new area you uncover, only more questions come to mind. And behind all these questions too are societies on the brink of destruction, like shantytowns being controlled by gangsters and feral or cannibalistic outlaws. Sometimes you will even stumble upon people starving or in need of help deep in uncharted caves, or hear voices from beyond calling from ancient machinery whose purpose has been lost to the sands of time. You can feel in your soul the pain of every person, every location, every animal that you come across, and it gives you the impression that with each day, the world is simply fighting to survive. To survive in a place that might not even be worth living in, a situation quite literally in the depths of hell. Whereas a lot of dying worlds and games tend to focus on the serene qualities of nature left untouched, or the calming silence of a universe that has nothing to say, Underrail takes the opposite approach, and shows us a dying world consumed by rage, despair, and a distinct sense of hopelessness. It makes the game itself so depressing to play, but sometimes that's just the mood we are looking for, an escape into a world so sadistic and evil that we can't help but be thankful for the safety we have in our own lives by contrast. And maybe more than anything, it's another great example of why dying worlds and games are so special. They can teach us a lot about ourselves, fully immersing us in worlds that are so tragic they are hard to imagine, but yet still have a strange pull that we cannot escape, forcing us to dive deeply into the questions of how this existence became so lost. It's not often that a game shakes me to the core, painting haunting pictures in my mind so vividly that it makes nightmares feel like exciting adventures. But in the case of The Void, also known as Tension, we get treated to a dying world so sick, so twisted and strange that you can't help but live in fear of what it stands for. In the game, you play as an unknown entity that is awoken in a place called the Void, a purgatory-like liminal space full of dark and foreboding swamps or houses, along with creatures that defy all logic with multiple heads, limbs, and even minds. But most prominent of all of these are what are called the Brothers and Sisters, transcendental beings that along your journey try to sway you along specific paths, whether that be death and destruction or mending and clairvoyance. Constantly in your head or in front of your vision speaking to you, they ask you to accomplish certain tasks or solve puzzles. But during each of these sequences, it never is fully clear what is going on. All that you can work out is that you are trapped in this strange place, surrounded by souls that are neither in heaven nor hell, instead stuck drifting through the endless eternity of nothingness. And everywhere you look are the screams of a dead and forgotten world. Plant life has been stripped of color, a resource you can use in-game to progress, and even the houses you find yourself in are characterized by almost a haunted house feeling rather than anything cozy and familiar. A dark mist blankets most of the play space, and even walking through it makes you feel sick and depressed, looking into things you shouldn't, like Eve and the forbidden fruit of the Bible. And more than anything, the aspect of the Void that makes it such a special game is exactly this feeling it provides. Because despite how otherworldly and dead this place, or figment of our imagination is, it still tells a story all to its own. Like when you climb the massive branches of diseased trees trying to make your way to ethereal realms of existence, or stumbling upon an ancient tomb full of fire and walls that reach great heights. Each of these places tells the story of something grand happening there, of the Void being more than just our imagination, but rather a lesson. Why are there so many souls trapped here? What was it like before? Was there even a before? And also, who are we? Who are the brothers, the sisters? What is all of this trying to tell us? All of these hidden secrets make Tension one of the most philosophical games out there in a way, even in the absurdist fashion in which it's all approached. But once again, none of this would work as well as it does without the extremely atmospheric approach the game takes, of peeling back the layers to a ruined and irredeemable hellscape that is full of oppressive and dreamlike visions fraught with danger and shaped by the decisions we made as a player on our journey. In a lot of ways, the setting itself is a reflection of how we as the player and protagonist feel, so trapped and afraid of what is behind every corner, or of what we might uncover in our own minds should we carry on. Nothing in the Void really makes much sense at all, but that's also what makes it such a special experience, and also a key ingredient behind so many amazing games with dying worlds. Because a key aspect in any world that is dying is the disease that caused it to get there, whether that be a pathogen of our genome and the environment, or one that stems from the very neurons in our brains. Dying worlds like these are special because in a way it's the best part of any world building out there. The decay that we find in the environment, and how it speaks to us on a fundamental level about the horrors we can find in our own societies and minds, and how we might tackle them lest we succumb to the same fates. And in the case of games with worlds and so much despair it makes us worry about our very own getting close, nothing quite compares to the absolute horrors of the forgotten and strange world of the Void or Tension. Few games manage to have quite as a profound effect on us as Shadows of the Colossus. The original game was released in the early 2000s and was immediately met with roaring acclaim and love. It tells the story of a protagonist known as Wander, who is set out on a desperate quest to bring a girl named Mono back to life. In order to do so, Wander makes a pact with a mysterious and disembodied entity named Dorman, who is rumored to have the ability to resurrect the dead. But for Dorman to use this power, he tells Wander they must slay 16 Colossi, massive and ancient beings that roam the land, each imbued with a fragment of Dorman's own essence. So you set out on a journey across massive, desolate landscapes, each with beautiful scenery, but a creepy lack of any life outside the Colossi. Something unspeakable has occurred in these lands before, and now all that is left are what are supposed to be monsters. But with each Colossus that you kill, it becomes apparent that not everything is what meets the eye. Wander starts to gain darker features and an evil glow, as the lands around dead Colossi start to wither away and die, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. Were these Colossus the protector of the land? And if so, where did everyone go? And as you continue your path of killing these hulking beasts wherever you find them, you eventually discover more and more of the world, including ancient structures and enormous valleys that dwarf you as the player character. The people that used to live here must have been especially impressive, and it's a wonder then how they even disappeared out of nowhere. And more than any other games with dying worlds, the one in Shadow of the Colossus is utterly breathtaking. This isn't a universe where death and decay are at the forefront, but rather calming ocean breezes, the sounds of nature, and green as far as the eye can see. If there was a tragedy in this world, it must have taken place long ago, and in its wake, all that is left is raw beauty and majestic monsters that reach into the heavens. And it makes actually playing the game such a calming experience, and it shows us that dying worlds can sometimes be the most awe-inspiring possible. However, as the story of the game progresses and more colossi are vanquished, it becomes clear that whatever we are doing is killing the world, and that Dorman may be on a path to great evil that will unlock potentially what destroyed this world before. It's not only a great, albeit obvious twist, but also a cool spin on the traditional dying world trope in games, where not only do we get to explore the aftermath of pain, but also become the catalyst for the next cycle. In an attempt to save the one we loved, we are actually dooming the future. And it's a perfect example of how dying worlds can even come about in the first place, and proves that even with good intentions, the greatness of humanity or the world can evaporate quickly. It really does make playing Shadow of the Colossus such a tragic experience when you realize what is actually happening, as in a way you are literally destroying everything that is beautiful that you've seen around you, or in other words, in a world that was already characterized by so much stillness and silence, you are paving a horrible future ahead. One of the most beautiful and tragic cases of a dying and forgotten world in a game of all time. Exo One is a game I've heard almost no one talk about, and that's because it's one of the most basic titles out there. Similar to experiences like Journey, the gameplay on offer is nothing more than simply moving your character, in this case a spaceship, around the environment and looking at things. But within this simple setup is one of the most powerful, beautiful, and haunting rides out there. In the game's lore, years ago, a NASA mission to Jupiter was launched in the hopes of finding truly special discoveries. But when the astronauts aboard the spacecraft known as the Jupiter Flyer arrived, something horrible happened. The crew could be heard on intercoms complaining about a strange voice and sound, after which a fire breaks out and the intercoms cut. Clara, the wife of the main character, is lost, and without explanation, the protagonist, who at the time is aboard a monitoring vessel watching the Jupiter Flyer above the planet, finds themselves back on Earth, now with a message from aliens to build a special craft which will take you through the stars. So for the next 2 hours, you do just that, flying from one planet to the next, all for some unexplained reason. And this is where the magic happens. Each and every planet you travel to in between is barren, dead, and desolate, devoid of life or any meaning at all. Massive mountains paint the sky with colors that bleed emotion and pain at every step. Text will flash on screen at times as we get a glimpse of what looks to be long-lost civilizations, or hints that these dead worlds may not have always been that way. And on each of these planets, there's almost a calming sense to it all, as usually the only sounds you can hear are the rushing wind as you fly across the ground at hundreds of miles an hour, or the faint pitter-patter of rain as it cascades down from the sky. Oftentimes during your travels as well, you will find massive structures that are metallic and foreboding, but obviously no longer in use. Clearly the aliens who have beckoned us on this journey are trying to tell us something, but it's never quite clear what that something is. All we have to go off of are these worlds, so infertile, so sterile. And these worlds only become more and more horrifying as we explore them deeply. Seeing so many massive and strange structures now covered completely in sand and dirt, or contraptions that have been overtaken by the cruelness of the elements, is heartbreaking, yet exciting at the same time. A truly horrific event happened in all of these places that presumably left entire ecosystems and civilizations dormant and forgotten hundreds of years later. But what exactly caused all of this? What could possibly have led to so much death and destruction on not one, but many planets? Well, we never get our answers. It's left completely open-ended, and in the void, instead, our curiosity is filled with the evocative imagery and sensory overload of these environments, along with some truly breathtaking sequences traveling through the stars, being put face to face with the grandness of our own existence, or short memories of the life that we once lived, set to the backdrop of introspective and contemplative music. And to me, Exo One is a perfect example of what makes dying worlds and games so special. Those feelings you get taking your time through each location and just soaking it all in. How the hairs on your arms stand up when you hear the eerie music crescendo as you plunge deep underwater, or the countless questions that pop into your head as you play. Dying worlds and games are a perfect playground for exploration like this, where half the fun is the experience itself and how it makes us think about what happened in the past, how things got to this point, and whether or not it's all an analogy for our surely doomed future or an optimistic warning from aliens not to make the same mistakes. Sometimes less is actually more. And in the case of games with dying and forgotten worlds, often it's the things we never get to learn or the lessons never said aloud that stick with us the most. The beauty of simply looking out into a vast ocean that once held life and being taken aback by the wonder of it all. Or drifting through the clouds of a planet now composed of nothing but noxious gas and wishing things could go back to a simpler time that presumably held so much life. For a lot of people, they play games to have fun or shoot things, but sometimes we all just need an experience more intimate with nature itself, with both its beauty and horrors alike on full display that takes us on a journey through our own minds. There's something truly terrifying about being cold, surrounded by ice, snow, and the blackness of certain death as the rays of the sun are stamped out from the sky, coddled only by the clothes on our back that cast away frostbite and the numbing of our minds. Unlike all other forms of weather, the bitterness of cold makes us feel alone and afraid. Even those who succumb to harsh winters as their bodies shut down have been said to have a strange sense of euphoria in their final moments, stripping down to their bare skin to embrace the clutches of death in a crazed mania. And no game captures the essence of dying worlds from cold like this better than Frostpunk. Set in an alternative 19th century, you take the reins of a leader of a small group of survivors trying to stay alive in the frozen wasteland that is now Earth. Years ago, volcanic eruptions around the planet led to a cataclysmic winter unlike anything humanity has seen before. Crops died, infrastructure froze solid in place, and friends and families were torn apart as scavengers fought for the scraps they had left, resorting to cannibalism against the bodies of those who had already perished. The cold was so fierce that no amount of clothing could save us, and only the strongest of will were allowed to survive. As a leader of one of these band of survivors, you've been traveling for hundreds of miles through the endless abyss of snow and ice, looking for a massive coal generator that may just be your salvation. In both the first and second game, your survival revolves around finding heat sources just like this, and building entire civilizations around them in order to give humanity one last hope at a future that seemed to be so lost. And throughout each moment of your new people's reign, there is disaster. Spikes in the cold that can result in half the population dying, or riots in the street as to which politicians will lead your salvation in the years to come. So it's your task to figure out how to save everyone while keeping tempers low. No easy proposition, and one that will often see your entire playthrough culminating in failure. But more than just the interesting setup and jarring moment-to-moment gameplay, Frostpunk is a fascinating look into the depths of a truly cursed and dying world. A place that no matter how you spin it, is on its last legs, with so little hope left. And unlike many other similarly desolate worlds, the Earth of Frostpunk is despicable even now. Rather than seeing the remains of humanity combed over by vegetation or erosion, instead the current times are even more pressing than the past. The cold is unrelenting, the pain is never-ending, and the depression burrows into each soul deeply. It truly feels like not only a world that has been cast into hell, but one that will never be able to dig itself out. And that aspect of the cold makes it all the more haunting. It's an environment where even the embrace of a loved one holding a warm blanket against your frozen skin does nothing to combat the shivers across your body. A dying world and setting in which you cannot escape. Everywhere you turn is nothing but the same biting grasp of winter and crying faces stuck in place. For as scary as many other games with dying worlds are, there really is just something about the cold, so lonely, so depressing and devoid of feeling that captures an essence unlike anything else. Because even in the happier moments of Frostpunk games, nothing ever gives us true relief. A dying world that is so fearsome, it kills our spirit as well. Whereas with most worlds that have collapsed or are collapsing, we find ourselves in more introspective moments wondering about our own lives and what parallels we can glean. In the stillness or cold of Frostpunk, there is nothing to think about but survival. A world so taken over by pain that only the human spirit can prevail. And a great reminder of just how relentless that human spirit is. That even in the depths of the deepest cold can lie a fire in our hearts that burns even brighter. Other dying worlds and games make you think or ponder on the questions of life. But Frostpunk reminds us that the only reason we get to think in the first place is because of the heroes and people amongst us who in the greatest times of peril rise above circumstance and overcome the unthinkable to forge a better tomorrow and bring life to a world from the ashes.